all the businesses I'm involved in, we're trying to understand, first of all, what is AI? And then how can it be used? And I think there are a number of examples, even today, where AI doesn't get it right. There's a danger with AI, rubbish in, rubbish out.
PayPoint is a hugely recognizable brand. I'm sure you've seen the signs outside convenience stores all over the UK. But what may be less familiar is that it was one of the first British payment technology businesses emerging out of the late 90s. And it really revolutionized the way millions of people transact across everything from payment meters to BBC license fee through to national lottery tickets. I am thrilled to tell you that we have got the CEO and chairman of PayPoint, Dominic von Trotha Taylor. Dominic spent the early days of his career as a submarine navigator for the Royal Navy and learned many life lessons from this experience, which stood him in good stead for a successful career in business. He left the armed forces with nothing really to go to, but following a response to a forgotten application with fledgling communications giant Vodafone, an amazing career started in the telecommunications space and then subsequently payments, which then took him to being part of the team which set up PayPoint, becoming chief executive in 1998 and spending nearly 22 years at the helm. He finally left in 2019 to pursue managing a portfolio of some of the UK's most exciting technology startups. This is an enlightening conversation with somebody who, quite frankly, has been there, done it, and has got the t-shirt. Seldom have I interviewed somebody with such credentials and business experience. It was a real treat. I think you'll love it. It's Dominic von Trotha Taylor. So, Dominic, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast from sunny Ibiza. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
So, look, the first question I always ask guests, and I'm particularly interested to hear your take on this. You've had an incredible career, and I know it's still probably a long way to go in your career, but looking back now, what are the key ingredients of good leadership? Or what does good leadership mean to you, Dominic?
Yeah, I think it encompasses a variety of things. I mean, I think first thing, it's important that the company, before you kind of engage people, is to work out what the values of the company are. You know, what does this company stand for in terms of how we behave? What is important, all those sorts of things. Then I think it's important to make sure that people understand that there's a very clear plan as to what we're trying to do, that no one's confused around, what we're trying to achieve and where we are on that journey. And then, to make sure individuals understand what their involvement in that plan is and how they're assessed and how they're managed and how they communicate about progress. And, that talks about leadership structure, how people are empowered through the leadership team to be able to do that, how to encourage people, how to track progress and make sure we're still on our core mission, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
And, to have a culture in the organization that doesn't get political, that is very true to what we're trying to get done, that talks about the important things, dismisses the irrelevant things and the distractions, and has a culture as well whereby people can openly challenge things, a challenge where we are, out the truth when things aren't quite working properly or we're not quite on progress, those sorts of things. So, I think leadership is about having a clear set of rails which you set out, the way in which we drive down those rails, and having a very transparent culture around truth.
Yeah, brilliant. No, absolutely. I think you covered pretty much all elements there, didn't you? I think absolutely setting a goal and taking the team on the journey with you and making
correct,
and obviously allowing them to feel part of that journey. I always use maritime examples in this respect. If someone's rowing in the wrong direction, then it does affect the course of the ship, doesn't it? So
correct.
So yeah, no, that's really, really interesting, Dominic. So for the listeners who are not so familiar with yourself, I'm sure they would have heard of PayPoint, but maybe not so familiar with yourself and your journey. Could you give us maybe a high-level overview? I'm particularly interested in the earlier days of your career. Upon leaving university, I know you went to Naval College. What set you on the path that you ultimately went on up until the point of setting up PayPoint?
It's a very good question, and it's better to articulate looking backwards than it was looking forwards. To be frank.
Retrospect is a great thing.
Retrospect, yeah. I was born in West London, My parents were antique dealers, Portobello Road. So my early life was helping my mum and dad get stock, help on the stall, which started off in a stall and then end up in a shop. And so I guess through that, I kind of got a little bit, absorbed a little bit about what commerce was about, the need to make a profit and all those sorts of things. I went to grammar school and didn't do as well as I thought I was going to do at grammar school. I wanted to go to one of, a mega university. And my parents had sort of set me down that line. And actually, I got an average set of A levels. I thought, oh my God, I don't want to go to, I just took a view, I didn't want to go to what I perceived to be an average university. And then I did one of the things that I've now done consequently a lot in my life. I hadn't realized it was going to be a theme of my life, as I did a handbrake turn on intuition and joined the Navy. I had no experience of being in the Navy before. It was literally a decision that was made over 3 months. And I applied to go to Dartmouth as a young cadet and became a naval officer, and ultimately spent the best part of 10 years in submarines during the Cold War.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I kind of left that phase of my life again completely by accident at the end of the Cold War. 1989 is when I left. And I left because I had a pretty successful career as a young junior officer in submarine. I ended up being navigator of a nuclear submarine. I was selected to go on what they call the submarine command course. And I kind of felt, I'm at a sort of moment in my career at that stage where I can either stay in the Navy and go through to the rest of my career, getting to wherever I'd get to, or at the age of that stage, I was still 28, 29, I could jump out and do something completely different. Yeah. And I did my second handbrake turn, much to the surprise of the Navy, and I left. And because at that stage I didn't have a formal degree, I'd gone to the officers' school at Dartmouth, but I didn't have a formal degree. So I thought, well, I'd better go and get a degree. So I went off and did an MBA at a place called Cranfield, just north of London, near Bedford, and had an amazing time. I had no idea what I was going to learn. I thought I knew nothing about finance and nothing about business, which I guess would be true having been in the Navy. But actually, I knew a lot more than I thought. And I discovered quite a lot about myself in the context of, I thought initially I might want to work for a big company. Despite having done very well on the course, I ended up, again, married with 2 young children without a job. And so I thought, oh my God, this wasn't the plan. So I briefly started a business, which was a sort of house maintenance business. I used to live, at that stage, I was living on the South Coast with a friend of mine, and that paid the bills, got money in. And you know how sometimes you want to apply for a job and you write to all these companies, say, I'd really like to work with you. And I did a load of those, including one to Vodafone while I was doing my MBA. And I got no answer, which was basically the case with pretty much all the letters I sent out. But lo and behold, about a year after leaving Cranfield, I got this letter from Vodafone saying, we'd like to talk to you about a job. So
what was it, a response?
Yeah, well, kind of a response, because that's how they knew about you, knew about me. So for all those listeners that kind of send letters out and never get responses, they often do get there. And then in my case, one of them at least got read. And they were looking for someone to set up a business in Germany for them. And I should say, by the way, my mother was German, so I'm half German. Anyway, I got interviewed by the chief executive of Vodafone for this role to be their man on the ground, setting up a business in Germany. And I got the job. So I was absolutely amazed. So that got me into mobile telephony at the very beginning of digital mobile telephony, basically. And that took me into a kind of career through Vodafone. Then I became the first product manager for text messaging, SMS, within the business. And we spent a lot of time in the company trying to work out how SMS text messaging might be used. But of course, we had no idea how big it was ultimately going to be. We thought it was going to be big, but no idea how big.
I had a red Vodafone. It was quite early on. I remember I was texting when not that many people were texting. I'm showing my age now, but I was quite young at the time. And I remember it. Yeah. Vodafone were one of the pioneers of the text message in the UK market, weren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they were. We spent, in that particular role, I was working with the engineer. I mean, you probably gathered by now, I'm not an engineer at all. I'm not a tech specialist. I was working with the key architect, if you like, of the GSM specification to try and work out what is this text messaging thing is actually in the signaling channel as opposed to the voice channel, and how can we use this? And it was previously always a kind of chat channel for engineers, if you like. That's what it was really kind of used for.
Sure.
And we were thinking, well, how can we commercialize this? And if we do that, what could we do with it? And so we're designing all sorts of commercial hooks so that when the GSM standard was approved and was starting to be used, we could start to launch all these services. And then I'll go to handset manufacturers and say, we've got this thing, text messaging coming through, and this is how it could be used, and you need to be potentially identify a phone number or something within the text so that they can then. And of course, the people are saying, well, why would you do that? Because if you're going to communicate like that, why wouldn't you just call?
Yeah.
And stuff that we take for granted now as to how text messages are being used were absolutely not understood clearly at that stage. So it's very, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, I then went on to get involved in a Vodafone-led bid to run the National Lottery before the National Lottery was started. We didn't win it. It wasn't Camelot. And that ultimately led me to PayPoint, as it happened.
So in terms of PayPoint, did you set PayPoint up along with co-founders, I'm assuming, yes?
Yeah, I literally, it's one of those funny things. In the bid for the lottery, I got to know a number of key players that worked in supporting retailers and technology in retailers.
Yeah.
And when I was becoming, pretty disillusioned around the sort of politics of very big companies and kind of wondering where it was going, coincidentally, one of the key people I knew said, look, I'm just starting with this startup business. It's literally on the verge of starting, has just started. They desperately need someone with your experience from the way you design the whole lottery thing.
Yeah.
And would you be interested? And so I joined probably within 6 months, 4 to 6 months of PayPoint having started.
Yeah, sure.
It was then backed by a number of utilities because they were going to get the key value out of of the PayPoint proposition. So they were the sort of founding shareholders.
Yeah, sure.
And I joined initially as retail director to set all that up. But within a few months, I became CEO as the number of management changes were made at the shareholders' request.
There's a lot to unpick there, Dominic. Okay, and the question I want to ask you there is, being in the submarine is a very unnatural, irregular environment, and I'm sure you spent endless days underwater, probably months. What did that experience teach you about life and leadership?
It's a really good question. But I think the thing I can say this more in retrospect than probably at the time. But the thing I really liked about the submarine experience, particularly relating to life afterwards, was that you went to sea, and whilst you're under the water, you can't really communicate. And so, you're given a brief about what you're there to do. Let's say you're going on a patrol to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
You know what your brief is, so the mission is really clear. You're underwater, so you're basically alone.
Yeah.
And if things don't quite work out or things go wrong, you've got to work out how to solve it there and then. There's no sort of rescue.
Press the red button and someone comes and rescues you. Yeah.
There are no consultants you can sort of dial in to sort of help. You're there. You're on your mission. You know where you're trying to go, and you get down and sort that out. And I really liked that sort of very clear, direct kind of purpose on a mission by mission basis. I thought that was very powerful. The other thing that I think was very important at that time was the sort of culture of how you get things done with people. Probably never been on a submarine, very few people have, but essentially you're living in a machine. Yeah. You don't have a bedroom in the way we know it at home. You're actually living in a machine, and the crew are kind of housed in and out of the pipes, as it were, of the machine. And so it's quite intense in terms of the environment, and that brings out a very, very strong culture.
Yeah, sure.
And it's a no bullshit culture. If people are bullshitting, people recognize that very quickly. Uniforms and rank has much less prominence over personality and your ability to lead and gain respect and all that kind of stuff. And I think culturally, those are organizations that I like working in, that where it's less hierarchical. It's more about, look, we respect each other. We've got different jobs. We communicate clearly, and we solve problems openly, and we get on and get this thing that we're set with, that we're trying to get done.
No, that makes total sense. No, I had to ask you about the submarine stuff because I found that fascinating. I wanted to go back to PayPoint then. Fascinating organization. I think, obviously, companies like PayPoint financial technology companies are kind of commonplace these days. But in 1996, that wasn't the case, was it? There wasn't really that much of a startup culture at all in the UK around payments companies, for sure. So what sort of challenges did you have trying to scale that?
I mean, the initial use case was like all these things. Looking backwards, the PayPoint evolved, I guess, on a step-by-step basis. And the initial use case, or the initial problem that we're trying to solve, is that you remember, you may not remember, but when ATMs started on high streets, every bank had their own ATM. So you go to go to a wall, and you'd have an HSBC one, you'd have a Lloyd's one, you'd have a whatever one, all in a row. And then someone realized, actually, this is nuts. We've got all these different machines basically do the same thing. Why don't all the banks share one machine?
Share one. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And that was the sort of fundamental logic. And so in the world of PayPoint, when we started, many consumers, particularly cash-reliant consumers, were paying their bills in cash. And those days, and they're still today, actually, that their energy prepayment meters used to have a chip-based device that had to be charged at the retailer, so the consumer would pay over cash. And you'd load that cash value, if you like, onto the chip, onto a little, what they call key, that the consumer was holding. And then they take that key back to the meter at home, and the value paid would be uploaded on the meter, and the energy would flow. And so the initial use case was for different utilities, that how every utility had one of these machines in a retailer, and you'd have all these different machines all lined up on the retail counter. And we thought, well, this is crazy. Why didn't you have one machine that does all of that in the store? It opens up more space on the shop counter, and provides an easier service for the retailer, because all these things are done in the same way through the same device.
Yeah, sure.
And that was essentially the initial main use case, working with the energy companies to try and get all their slightly different standards and different ways of doing things in their individual machines to work through our device. And that's where it all started from. And then television license payments came through. And as we started to evolve and get volume consumers making payments through, we're able then to broaden that out to normal bill payments. And then it rolled forward. And once we started to get strong penetration in bill payments, in terms of cash bill payments, we then started to think about online payments and how we can offer a broader payment solution, mobile payments. And then we started to think, well, actually, we've got all these customers we're bringing into retailers, and these are typically independent retailers. And what other services can we provide to the retailer that would help the retailer? And what other services can we offer to consumers? So that got us into parcel collection, for example. Collect Plus is a business that we started. So if you can't get your parcel delivered to your home, have it delivered to the local shop. You can pick it up when you're ready. Yeah, sure. And I'd like to say we had the whole vision of where PayPoint ended up at the beginning. We didn't, but you start with one brick of opportunity, and then you think, right, pivot accordingly. As you kind of roll through, and it was a fascinating journey. Yeah, absolutely. There's loads of things there I wanted to ask you about, but so let's maybe do it chronologically then. So you took over as chief executive in '98. The strategy then, I'm assuming, was all around shops, partners, post offices, stuff like that. The strategy then was to get at that stage that we had contracts with these large utilities to get the technology working, to aggregate all these different technologies into one new platform that I referred to earlier on, then to get that working, so customers understood it, retail understood it, it was working, and if that all worked, then the revenues would then flow in from these founding utilities. So that was like first base, get the thing off the ground, and then get to a point where we started to make money, that we started to become profitable, because the whole mission of any young startup business is to actually start to generate revenues to ultimately become profitable, so that you can live on your own cash generation, as opposed to always going to shareholders for more money. Where did the original sort of funding come from then? Was from our customers. So they had this problem. We presented them with an opportunity about how you can aggregate all this technology to provide a better service and reduce your costs. Right. And so if you invest in this opportunity, we'll deliver it on this basis, and the basis is fully described. That was the handshake. And then the first challenge was to deliver that as we promised we would, and then take it forward from there. Yeah, so you didn't have any venture capital
private equity people to appease from day one. It was just
No.
you owed it to your customers to make it work, and that's a brilliant
Correct.
way to start a business, isn't it? That's really...
It is, yeah. Identify a customer need, get them involved, help them fund it, or get them to help you fund it because they're going to get the benefit from it later. There's obviously a lot of trust involved there.
Sure.
And then off you go.
So you became chief executive at quite a transformational time for business and technology. It was the dotcom boom. Everyone was talking about Y2K around then, weren't they? In 98, 99.
Gosh, yes.
There was lots going on with that. Obviously, we had a massive influx of capital and interest into the dot-com space, and the internet was obviously still in its infancy then. Was that period a tumultuous time for PayPoint, or was it a period of growth?
It was in its own way. Well, ultimately it was a period of growth all the way through, but the Y2K thing rings things in my memory around that, because that was the Y2K issue was the whole issue around how does technology and incumbent technology adjust to the change of into the new millennium.
Yeah, that seems crazy now, doesn't it?
What was going to happen, and it does, yeah.
It was a very real thing back then, wasn't it?
What would happen to the technologies and how would they work, and in the context of PayPoint, I've described, there are lots of different technologies out there operated by different utilities or customers that we had. And, what would happen? Would consumers be able to charge up these key devices that I mentioned as the millennium turns to, starting with a two as opposed to a one? So we had lots of people on the ground, ready in case something went wrong at that time. There was a lot of preparation going on. That was a notable kind of operational management, planning ahead. What if this happened? How would we manage it? Kind of exercise in a very, very young company at that stage. So that was quite profound. I think more generally with the sort of dot-com and mobile payments and that kind of stuff, and it became obvious to us that we as a company needed to offer more than just cash payments and needed to offer, as it were, full payment solutions.
Yeah.
And that got us into internet payments. We built an internet payments company, and that was quite a challenging time, because at that stage there's a lot of the internet payment rules and regulations were still being formed. There's some very big companies out there doing it. We were still very much a minnow. Equally with mobile payments, which obviously came later, but the early stage of mobile payments was nothing like it is now as an integrated as a core payment method in the way we see it now. And so we dabbled in either liaising with companies or creating companies to get into these spaces, to learn, to understand how these things work, and then ultimately work out strategically how PayPoint should actually get involved in those sorts of things.
Yeah.
We built an internet payment business. We ultimately sold, but we actually leveraged the learning out of that into build that into a core platform solution.
Right, gotcha, yeah.
And we also bought a mobile payments business, actually Pay by Phone, you might know from parking. We own that business. We ultimately sold that on to a German car company, VW.
Yeah.
But we took the learnings from what we learned from that and integrated that into a multi-channel payment solution that the business now has. And that has evolved significantly, since I left in 2019.
Yeah, sure. What about regulation and compliance then? Because obviously it's a bit of a minefield, payments. I think you obviously weren't, you're obviously not a bank, so you didn't have to get a banking license, but you probably did have a lot of regulation and compliance that you had to adhere to. Talk us through how that, did that harm your growth plans at all in any way, or was it something you embraced and was it not that restrictive for you?
Regulation and compliance is always restrictive for the right reasons. And, in a way, it's the other side. Insofar as we were always trying to learn about what the opportunity was by owning these internet businesses and ultimately mobile payments businesses and so on, what is the opportunity? How far can we go? The clarity of regulation needs to make it really clear as to what the boundaries are. And I think understanding that and having good conversations with regulators to sort of understand those boundaries properly is the critical thing.
Yeah.
I'm generally for regulation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it has to be there to protect the consumer, if anything.
Payments regulation is very, is quite complex.
Yeah, no, I can understand. So, I wanted to ask you about the internet business. So, obviously, that was an enormous growth area. I'm just curious why you didn't proceed with that and make that your core business, like a PayPal or something like that?
I think because our core business was really, and still is the crossover between creating a great solution for a segment of customers that started off with cash paying customers,
Yeah.
and what that relationship was with corner shops up and down the country.
Yeah.
And, at my time, we had about 28,000 relationships with corner shops up and down the country, bigger than the post office and the supermarkets and the banks put together. It's an enormous network.
Wow.
And our core business was much more about how do we drive value to retailers and value to consumers and create new services in that very unique crossover. That was, in a way, our differentiation.
Yeah, sure.
As a business. I think in business, differentiation is such an important thing. And if you can establish that sort of differentiation and drive that through your business, and we created another business in Romania, and we're looking to do that in other countries at the time, to use the same experience that we had created out of the UK to push into other countries. The company is now much more UK centric, but that was my kind of view at the time, is to grow through the differentiation we created in the UK and then into other countries.
Yeah, sure. Now that makes sense.
And that was our kind of core purpose. And we could have been much more general list payments, as many companies have been.
Yeah.
But you have less differentiation in those markets. I wanted to leverage what we'd created.
Yeah, sure. So what do you think about the emergence of the fintech sector in the UK in the 2010s? It was obviously an explosion of payments companies in the 2010s and challenger banks. Is that something which surprised you, or is that something that you just thought was just inevitable at some point?
These things are easy to look back on and say, it's probably a natural evolution of how technologies emerge and how you can drive much better solutions for consumers. And that drives a bow wave of companies getting into that space with a lot of creativity and so on. At the time, think, oh, wow, there's this completely new thing here. And one always surprised how great some of these consumer solutions can be. And so, yes, I think looking backwards, I think it's been a very natural thing. And I think the evolution of payments is evolving, continuing to evolve all the time. I think they're great new solutions that kind of come out there through entrepreneurial efforts. I'm involved with a company called Nude. I'm a director on that and an investor in that company today. That is a very young startup business that is providing great new saving solutions. Consumers that are or young people that are looking to buy their first home.
Yeah, sure.
And are trying to wrestle around, how do I get a mortgage, and how can I find a platform that's going to help me do that? And companies like Nude, or sit into this fintech sector, are providing great solutions to motivate people through open banking, to give them tips as to how they can better save for their mortgage and actually reduce the time it takes to get their deposits and get their first home. And so I think that's an example of how even today, completely new solutions can come out that drive and make a big difference to consumers. And if you get those things right, then you start to get traction, and you start to create a whole new wave of new opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a brilliant segue, Dominic. I wanted to talk about your portfolio. So you obviously leave PayPoint. You didn't want to keep your hand out for too long, quite clearly. I think you obviously wanted to get back involved, and obviously you had all these amazing lessons and battle scars, I like to call them, and I'm sure that's going to be of massive value to entrepreneurs, and I know you do some work around that as well. But tell us about that sort of period after you left PayPoint, and that period since, and what companies and what organizations you're involved with right now.
I realized a couple of things. I realized that I really like startups. I really like the energy of young companies trying to go through all the enormous challenge of actually, launching their rocket, building the rocket in the first place and getting it off the ground, if I can use that analogy.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And getting it into orbit where it's sort of, it's got there. And so I like all that energy. And so I made a very clear decision that rather than join lots of bigger company boards as a non-executive, which I kind of could have done, I'd much rather work with young businesses. Yeah. And that combined with the fact that I wanted to invest a little bit of money, and I'd much rather be close to what's happening with my investment, on a board or being involved with a company, than just hand it over and not getting any feedback on a day-to-day basis. So that was the other dynamic. And so my journey in that regard started with some of my colleagues at PayPoint who had left at various points at that stage, and they got involved in a business called Turtle, which is a business around digital documentation. So I joined that company as a non-director, became chairman of that, and I'm still chairman of that. And that has gone through quite a strong evolution. They've had a Series A. They're now, got a proper PE backer, and they're working through all the challenges of, today's market. And, that's kind of going well. And then I also invested by complete accident in this what was described to me just as a blockchain business from a guy who had an enormous vision around how they can change the world. And I quite like, visions like that.
Yeah.
And so I got involved in what became IOV. That happened while I was still at PayPoint, and it was a very hands-off investment. But when I left, I thought, well, actually, it'd be quite, I've made a small investment in this business. Why don't I reach out? By that stage, I'd arrived in Malta just in time for COVID.
I was going to say.
And so I had nothing to do.
There are worse places to be, Dominic.
I was getting a little bit stirred. That's true. But I had nothing to do other than sort of walk around, and nobody wanted to talk to me because, for all the obvious reasons. So I thought, oh, gosh, I've got to get involved in something. So I reached out to this business that I invested in ages ago, in IOV 42. And I quite quickly became chairman there. And then subsequently, after a few months, became CEO, which is what I'm kind of currently doing. For me, that was quite an interesting journey because the breadth of vision this founder had, which was basically to say, look, there is something in this blockchain, crypto-related technology. It doesn't work for business. And what I want to do is to build something that works for business.
Yeah.
That was the sort of hypothesis. And why doesn't it work for business? And what would make it work for business? Because as we know, in business, the fundamentals of doing businesses, you've got to know who you're dealing with. You can't just deal with anyone. You need to know who you're dealing with. You've got to know that the asset you're wanting to buy or sell or trade is really does exist. You've got to know that it works in line with regulation and that you're not doing anything illegal in the process. All those sorts of things. Yeah. You've got to use the infrastructure that business uses, and businesses for processing tend to use data centers. They don't use a whole string of individual laptops tied together, as it were. And so he built this kind of, he built a brand new protocol that is not based on Ethereum or Bitcoin or anything else. He built his own protocol to solve the problems that very general terms that I articulated. And when I kind of got more involved, it was just at the point after a few years. I mean, we did the classic thing is you don't build a technology without knowing what the use case is first. The time that I got more involved, the technology was available to be used for the first time, was kind of, it's finally usable based on the principles that I've just mentioned.
What type of assets are we talking about here with IOV 42? Is it just all types of digital assets, like cryptocurrency, for example, digital identities, I think?
We don't have a coin, any sort of currency dynamic, which very consciously, we could have done, but we very consciously decided we need to separate ourselves.
Okay.
From all the sort of crypto stuff, Coinbase stuff, because there's a lot of hype around all of that. Sure. And essentially, it wasn't relating in the way that we wanted to directly to business purpose. And so we chose not to have coins. We chose to articulate our proposition in terms of digital identities. And we are not a company that decides who is a valid identity, but we provided a methodology through which our customers could define identity. And that was the underlying kind of logic.
Yeah.
And our first use case happened to be in the area of timber. There's an enormous challenge with timber. The World Bank says that something like 15 to 30% of timber is illegally harvested. And we hear about the impact of that all the time around the world, correct? Right. So, that trees are felled illegally, that they are pushed into countries and sold illegally. Right. And that is a major, major worldwide problem at the moment.
Well, that's a global thing then. So even timber in the UK, is it illegally sourced in the UK, or is it more an export? It comes from countries where it's been illegal?
I think it's more of an export-import thing, because most of the timber that we kind of read about, particularly hardwoods, come out of whether it's South America or Africa or in the Far East. And these are big challenges getting this right.
Right.
And so the challenge is, how do you start to create trust?
Provenance
in an area where there is no provenance where there is no trust. And the Eureka ultimate solution is to be able to say, right, I've planted a tree here. I know exactly what that tree is. I can see it on a satellite.
Yeah, you've got the full life cycle of it. Yeah,
exactly. And that's basically, those are the solutions that we are now currently
that's
building.
brilliant. I think the concept of ownership is getting turned on its head. I think it all used to be done.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone in the aerospace sector, and we were talking about provenance around complex tooling for aircraft. So, for example, there's certain wrenches to fix Boeing aircraft, just to give it an example. Whereas if you haven't got the provenance, the ledger of that wrench, okay, that wrench is worthless. You can't use it, and it's worth thousands of pounds.
Correct.
So the regulators come in, and if you ain't got a logbook for that wrench, then you may as well throw it away because you can't use it. You know what I mean? But do you know how people record this at the moment in many manufacturing plants who do aero?
Tell me.
In handwritten logbooks. This was up until a couple of years ago.
Correct.
I mean, which is unbelievable. Unbelievable. So that just shows you how much of an opportunity that is here with digital, non-fungible tokens and things.
So we've seen that. That's exactly what we've been dealing with. Because, you think about it, and it's not just about the tree itself, it's also about all the other aspects around it. So is there slave labor being being used in this particular forest? Are people being fairly paid? Is the land legitimate? Does the government, authorize it and so on? So what we got started in this area with the process of timber production from the moment a tree, let's say a log from a tree, arrives at a sawmill.
Sure.
And it gets converted in a sawmill into, let's say, planks of wood, which are then stored for export, let's say, to the UK or Europe or wherever. And we started to map those, those processes.
Yeah.
And all the things that you refer to, everything was done but in paper, and they would have verifiers or certifiers, that would be well known, flying into the sawmill on a periodic basis to check that the paper's right and check the processes are right.
Yeah.
One of the byproducts of actually doing what we've done, which is to be able to put that on the blockchain. The fundamental point about blockchain technology, incidentally, I don't know how well your readers would understand blockchain, but a very simple speak, it's like a sort of spreadsheet in the sky. And when you put the data into a cell, it cannot be rubbed out. It cannot be changed.
Immutable
so
database.
There's a fundamental. It's an immutable database. So there's a fundamental premise of trust at that very moment.
Yeah. So regulators love it for that reason, don't they?
They will do as they get more involved in this stuff, because even though you can change the data, the changes are all recorded. So you can't effectively rub it out and put something else in there. And so, in addition to the trust that it comes through the way in which we process throughout the protocol, you get an enormous kind of digitization benefit. People that are used to using paper starting to use new technologies, which create efficiencies within these businesses and things too.
Yeah, sure.
But one of the interesting challenges about our technology is, well, how do I know that I'm dealing with this person? How do I, and what sort of protocol? And we've developed this within our protocol, something called claims and endorsements. So, the idea is anyone can make a claim about who they are. I can claim that I'm Dominic and I'm, 65, which is actually what I am. But how do you know my name's really Dominic? How do you know when I'm really 65?
Yeah, this is another one.
And you get an endorsement from, it could be from anyone. It could be from my mate who knows me. Or it could be from the passport office.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
probably more people believe the passport office than they would my mate necessarily.
Yeah.
And so you get all these endorsements coming through against claims, and some of them you'll have a bigger trust over than others. And if you apply that to wood, for example, you'll get a claim that this is legitimate land, but it'll be signed off by the government to say, yes, this is legitimate land. You'll get a claim that the people working there are all legitimately paid.
Yeah.
Again, the government might sign that off. So you get this whole verified claims that gets put on the blockchain with the log that you're importing, and also the claim through the sawmills and the claim from the exporter and the claim to the importer and so on.
Sure.
So you get this vast rate of data, which then regulators can assess and say, yeah, tick, this is legitimate. The provenance is proven.
Yeah, there's endless opportunity with this stuff, and I think I'm a big fan of Bitcoin, as the listeners probably, some of them will probably know. Not so much other cryptocurrencies, but I'm also a big fan of distributed ledger technology or blockchain for multiple use cases. But look, that sounds really exciting. The identity conversation is a big one with the sort of development of AI, because again, the example that you gave, how do I know you're Dominic? That type of thing. This deep fake thing is going to get more and more of a problem. Because AI technology is going crazy, isn't it? And I wanted to ask you about that, actually. So have you guys been looking at things like ChatGPT and AI innovation as spectators, or have you actually taken some of this technology and utilized it in some of your portfolio businesses?
All the businesses I'm involved in, we're trying to understand, first of all, what is AI? And then how can it be used? And in all the businesses I'm involved in, we're very open about it. I think there's a big opportunity there, obviously. And as you'll appreciate, this is all very early days too. So, there's lots of lessons to learn. If we have this conversation in 10 years' time, we'll be talking about, oh, well, that was all obvious. But, like with payment evolution, early in my experience and other things, things aren't quite as obvious as you think. But what I do think is going to be, it's a massive subject, and there's an enormous amount of value. I mean, it's quite interesting, for example, if I just use the example of Turtle, Turtle is able to import content that produced by a company and put it into a fantastic digital document that drives much stronger performance around sales enablement and all that kind of stuff. And so the question would be, is it the right thing to allow AI to drive these source documents?
Yeah.
And that will be largely down to the customer. But if you're not adding your own value in the creation of a document, all you're going to do is get what AI says the answer is. And I think there are a number of examples, even today, where AI doesn't get it right. There's a danger with AI, rubbish in, rubbish out.
100%, yeah.
And I think there have been quite a lot of well-known examples of how that's kind of happened. So that's a question for, if you like, the source documentation and how people use things. There's a lot of talk about AI in education at the moment, and how do students, how much of their own input have students put into these documents and so on. Where I think it becomes really interesting for companies is how they can use AI against their own data sets. And again, with the case of Turtle, they have, 1 billion data points around what makes a digital document look amazing in terms of its formatting, the ratio of text versus pictures, what sort of pictures you should have, all those sorts of things. And to apply AI against our own data set, I think it becomes a very valuable time-saving and optimization opportunity. And I think that's an example where it can work.
Yeah, sure.
And needless to say, we're beginning to think about those things. The same would be, and I think there's a lot of confusion with AI about, I think AI is the big banner, but where does machine learning sit within that?
Sure.
Where does actually just a very intelligent relational database sit within that? And I think the danger that AI is becoming the umbrella term for everything, for lots of stuff we already know, as well as all the new stuff coming through. And I think that's a bit of a watch out for listeners too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the impact that ChatGPT had on people has basically driven hysteria, but a lot of the hysteria is then based on stuff that's been around for a while. It's early days. The thing that I'm excited about, and which I think is quite profound, is if it's this good now, what's it going to be like in 5 years? It's going to be exceptional, isn't it? So.
Correct.
But it is definitely still early days.
It definitely can't be ignored. I'm in a position. I do think that it's going to be net very, very good, but there are going to be all sorts of pitfalls and dangers that are going to emerge that are going to have to be A, understood, B, as it were, cut out either through regulation or the way we do things.
Sure.
But I'm excited about the opportunity, and I think it'll drive a lot of value across a number of businesses over time.
We talked about AI, we talked about blockchain. What kind of tech innovation are you most excited about in the world right now?
I think the whole question around energy and how new sources of energy are going to be created, I think that's very, very exciting. There are obviously lots of different solutions in play. That's not a sector I'm involved in at all.
Sure.
But I think the imperative to replace fossil fuel energy with new sources of energy is for me, is very profound. And I'm very excited about how that might unfold.
So you're obviously a busy chap. lots going on with your portfolio and stuff. How do you stay organized, and how do you achieve balance in your life?
That's a question I ask myself all the time. And my children will be challenging me on that all the time too.
And I wanted to bolt something onto that as well. What's the number one piece of productivity advice you give to people to get more done?
I have tried. I think the shift because of COVID to remote working has been a very, very profound moment to reassess how what your productivity is and how you organize yourself. I was, to be frank with you, in the world of PayPoint, I was relatively old-fashioned. I had a PA, that I could, she sort of filed a lot of stuff away from me. Everything sort of, as it were, came towards me.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I arrived in Malta and I got involved with these digital businesses, and I'm sure many of my colleagues will still be saying I'm still not there yet, but I count the whole engagement around managing yourself on a laptop, being very, writing notes digitally, and diary management and all that kind of stuff. That for me, that has been a radical change.
Me too.
And I think working out how you do that and thinking, going into a quiet room and working out how you do that, what you use, how you use it, and then forcing yourself to get used to that. For me, that's been a dramatic difference for me and really, really helpful. And I'm actually I'm not one of these people that says we've all got to get back to an office. I'm not saying we shouldn't get back to an office, but I think there's an enormous benefit about remote working.
Yeah, sure.
And collaborating in the way we're talking today. But, with your team, I think there are enormous benefits of that. And, the truth is a hybrid solution is the right answer.
I agree.
Quite what the mix is for each half will vary by business and so on. And that's been
what kind of split is just in terms of Turtle, IOV, 42 and new? Do they sort of like 2 days in, 3 days off, or total remote, or what?
IOV is much more remote than Turtle because we're a much smaller business. Sure. And we have at least for now, we have a higher number of tech people in the business relative to everybody else. But the core of the IOV team, there's usually 3 or 4 people that are in our office, WeWork or whatever, almost every day in London. And when I'm there, I'd be with them. Whereas in Turtle, I'm guessing they probably have, a quarter to a third of the business are in every day, one way or the other, with higher amounts at various times as to get people together.
Yeah.
And that's right for them because they have many more outward bound salespeople, marketing people, and so on that need to have the collaboration than say IOV would today.
Yeah. So what career advice would you give to your 21-year-old self, Dominic? Looking back in your armchair now with your cigar and your dressing gown, looking back over your career, what advice would you give to that guy?
I think trust in your intuition. I've made, as I referred to earlier on, a number of handbrake turns in my time. So I think really, really trust your intuition. Don't be frightened about making mistakes.
Yeah, that's
because it's only through mistakes that you learn. Think hard about what you think is culture. Look for organizations that are open through which you can learn from your mistakes and that kind of stuff. And recognize that change is good. For me, change has been enormously important. And I think particularly in today's world when I was a kid, you'd typically start a career with the anticipation of being there for life.
Yeah.
That is definitely not the case nowadays. So change is good. And stay focused, and keep reassessing who you are, where you are, what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy, and gravitate to what you do enjoy and recognize what you don't enjoy.
Yeah, sure. And go with the momentum of what comes
and
next.
Go with the momentum of what you're doing and just keep reassessing and embrace change.
It's amazing how restrictive change and the fear of failure, isn't it? I think it gets it gets drilled into us in the education system. I think is obviously this sort of fear of failure, which is very restrictive. Doesn't seem to be the case so much in America. They tend to embrace failure a bit more.
Yeah, they do.
But so now that's a really, really good answer. Have you got a book or a piece of content that's inspired you recently that you could recommend to the listeners?
I tend to, most of my reading, unfortunately, is much more about business, but I'm starting to read a lot of spiritual stuff.
Oh, okay.
I read a book recently, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's essentially about successful people and how they're always on the drug of having to be successful on this sort of treadmill, and what stage do you step off that?
Yeah, sure.
And how do you fill the gap, and what your new purpose is about what your role in life is? And so I'm very interested about that. It's probably partly because I'm at that age that you can't always be running along a corporate treadmill, and you've got to find other things. I do a lot of sailing and that kind of stuff. That's really my main passion, and being outside in boats, and maybe going right back to my childhood. That's what I kind of really enjoy, and going for long walks and that kind of stuff.
You're actually a qualified sailor then. You've got the sort of...
Yeah, I've been sailing most of my life, and I've got an offshore skipper certificate and that kind of stuff.
You're a submarine navigator, aren't you? I'm asking, of course.
Well, exactly.
The sea is obviously in your blood, I suppose, isn't it? But
that doesn't mean I don't ever get lost.
Well, look, Dominic, really enjoyed chatting to you. Been fascinating. Some snippets of absolute wisdom for people. I'm sure that it'll go down really well. Thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
It's a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, I wish you well with it.
I have to say that was a fantastic conversation. Wow, I really enjoyed that. Dominic is such a... You could just tell he talks with authority. You can hear the experience in his voice, in his anecdotes. The language and the messaging was just very assured. There was obviously so many things I could point at as being highlights. But I have to say the submarine example, I really was keen to home in on that a little bit, because it's such a unique environment, such a unique life experience. Not that I know, but I do know submariners, and they are very, very mentally resilient people. I think the life lessons from the submarine experience was very insightful. I really enjoyed that part of the conversation, just being in that unique environment where there is just no get out of jail card. If something goes wrong, you are dealing with it. I thought that bit was absolutely fascinating. The stuff around blockchain was fascinating. I think that's IOV42. I think they're in a very exciting space, solving a very real problem with a huge potential market. So yeah, I expect to see great things from that venture for sure. Thank you for downloading. Fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found this episode valuable and thought-provoking, we would really appreciate it if you could quite simply click the subscribe button and possibly even leave a review. This helps us to spread the word and reach a wider audience so that we can make a bigger impact and bring you the best guests possible. Thank you so much for downloading.